We have no idea what the universe was.
To say that there's a chair and I put it in Antarctica and I say it serves no function, that doesn't take away from the designer that designed it for a specific function. It's a terrible argument.
We're the Existence Project, and we try to have respectful, loving conversations.
Nice to meet you.
What do you think?
Personally, I don't believe that there is a God.
Okay.
I don't think that there is definitive proof.
Okay.
I just don't find a reason to believe in God.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're out here. I think a lot of bad cases have been made for God. So that's why we're out here talking to people and saying there's actually substantial evidence when it comes to the existence of an intelligent force behind all of this. Let's say DNA, for example.
Okay.
DNA has within itself an embedded language. It has such a stupendously complex language, and it is communicating information in an orderly way. Now, when we talk about the scientific method, we know that for there to be language, there has to be a linguistic force behind it. And there's not a single element in the universe that demonstrates otherwise. Even the most hardened atheists, they acknowledge that there's absolutely, without a shadow of doubt, the appearance of design. And they try to explain that away through processes.
The question I would ask to people who make that argument is, what started God? You know, it just seems like you're pushing the point of ignorance just back one step further.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable in saying I don't know how the universe started.
Have you ever heard a response to that very valid statement, who started God?
Well, I've heard plenty of responses to it,
Okay.
but not from it. Are you Muslim?
Yes.
Okay, I've heard many Christian responses. I have not, so I would love to hear the Muslim perspective from that.
Well, very simply, the first thing is that everything, we ask a question about each thing according to its characteristics and attributes, right? According to its characteristics and attributes.
Okay,
It's like asking if the baker baked the bread, who baked the baker? You're not going to ask who baked the baker because the entity that made the bread is definitionally different. So the questions that have to be asked about is who birthed the baker? Do you see what I mean?
So I'm going to repeat back what I think you said, and you clarify.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we asked who baked the bread, but we don't ask who baked the baker.
If the baker baked the bread, who baked the baker? Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're saying the proper question is to ask who birthed the baker.
Yeah.
So the question must change.
Yes.
But I would argue that who baked the bread and who birthed the baker are more specific versions of the more general question, where did X entity come from?
Yes.
So I believe that question, where did such a thing come from, is perfectly general, and you can continue to ask that no matter how far back you go.
When a thing is by definition infinite, and we believe in infinities, for example, in mathematics.
Yes.
If a thing is infinite, the most nonsensical question is to ask, where did this infinity begin? It is a paradoxical statement.
Well, it depends
And infinity is by definition without beginning and end. So if we acknowledge that there are infinities in theory, then naturally the entity of God as postulated by all major faiths is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So to ask where that infinity came from is an irrational question.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that we should stop at that and that is sufficient. Islam says that, of course, our rationality is finite. You cannot fit an infinity into a finite object, but there should still be enough sufficient evidence through our investigation of the sciences that as we learn more about the natural sciences and the universe around us, it should point to the truth. So Islam poses something different that a lot of people have not even come to know about. It actually says that, look, as you learn more about the universe, it should point to a designer. And all of the greatest atheists and scientists, they say, yes, it was unlikely, but it happened. You can say that about the Big Bang, but then the fact that the 26 fundamental forces came together, you factor that by another 10 to the power of 26, and that's just a few seconds after the Big Bang. Mm-hmm. So when, for 13.8 billion years, we have been consistently seeing a particular direction, Islam invites people, lovingly, to ponder, is there a director of this direction?
Okay.
If there are mutable laws, there must be a lawgiver. If there is incontrovertible design, there must be some designer. What do you think?
Okay, well, there were a lot of points in there, so I'll just try and go based on what I remember. But the first thing you talked about was infinities.
Yeah.
And I do know a thing or two about infinities because I'm a physics major. You said that it is irrational to ask when an infinity starts. Well, it kind of depends on the type of infinity. So countable versus uncountable, this type of thing.
And that's why I said definitionally, as postulated by all major faiths, it's a claim that's being made by religions, right? That it has no beginning and no end.
Yes. Well, again, it depends on the type of infinity. Some do have a definitive endpoint and a start point. For example, if you're trying to count the number of numbers that exist between integers.
Yeah.
But I think I understand your point, which is an uncountable, or a countable infinity that has no ends in either direction. But my response to that particular point would be, why is it necessary that you must assign that infinitude to a god? I don't know whether or not the universe is infinite, whether or not there was a particular time at which it started, what happened before it, if it even makes sense to ask the question before, because there was no notion of time before. But I don't feel the need to push that assignment off to a god. It could just be,
May I respond
basically,
to this?
I don't know. The religious perspective is forcing a god onto that point of ignorance when that's completely unnecessary. And so from a reasonable perspective, it doesn't make sense to assert that there is a god, maybe to propose it as a theory, but I don't see any reason to believe that definitively. We don't know anything about the universe pre-Big Bang.
Actually, we know that when the Big Bang took place, before the Big Bang, the universe was a highly condensed object of infinite energy in a way that we don't understand. So
That
it's
would've been
not that
after
it...
the Big Bang.
Sorry?
That would have been after the Big Bang. It's known as a singularity, a point of infinite mass and infinite energy.
Yeah. So when we say the Big Bang refers to when that hyper-condensed mass that did exist, energy did, because it cannot be created or destroyed from a physics perspective.
Well, from a physics perspective in the current universe, before the Big Bang, my point is we don't know anything, any laws, if there were laws, any concept of time. The words before the Big Bang don't necessarily make any sense, so you can't really comment on that. All we know is what occurred afterward.
I agree with you. Okay. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that what we call the Big Bang refers to a dramatic change to that micromass, whatever it was. And we certainly know that it does not come from nothing. Naturally, this whole debate of this all coming from absolutely nothing, this has been debunked. For example, Lawrence Krauss has tried to argue that the universe can come from nothing. But even Professor Paul Davies and so many other of the leading physicists, astrophysicists, they say that this postulation that the universe came from nothing runs absolutely contrary to the fundamental understanding of physics. And this is the consensus. I'm not saying that I'm not appealing to authority. I'm saying I refer to the authorities of a subject. I think it's important. So on that front, I'm not saying that this is an absolute argument for the existence of God. What I'm saying is we're all interested. That's why we are trying to get as close to the Big Bang as possible.
You just didn't really respond to my argument that you're just pushing the point of ignorance further back, whereas I am not saying that I need to know that a God exists or that anything has to exist before the Big Bang, if before the Big Bang even makes sense as a phrase.
So, as I responded earlier, when we look at each thing in the chain of contingency of events, we have to ask a question according to the attributes and characteristics of that thing in the chain of events. If a thing by definition claims not to have a beginning, then to ask where that beginning came from is definitionally an irrational question.
Fair enough there, but my point is, why must you assign that to some entity known as a god rather than just the universe itself and say, maybe it doesn't make sense to ask where the universe comes from? Do you see my point?
Why does anything exist at all is a question that science so far does not seek to answer, and yet our nature and our conscience seeks an answer. Number two, insofar as the beginning of the universe is concerned, the universe decided when it was a tiny closed-up mass, and that's defined in various ways by various levels of astrophysics and cosmology.
Not really, but okay. It's defined in one very particular and clear mathematical way. But
what I'm talking about is the initial singularity.
Yes. That is a very clear mathematical definition. The entire, why we even propose that as a theory is purely for mathematics. So it has a very clear definition.
Okay, what is that definition? What is that definition?
Well, I haven't gone into the exact mathematics of it, but it is a point of infinite mass, infinite density, zero radius.
So it's infinite and infinite, you're saying?
Well, it's infinitesimal in some ways, you know what I mean?
Infinitesimal is the opposite of infinite.
Not exactly. See, have you taken mathematical courses?
No, but I'm acquainted with the English language. Infinitesimal means something that's very small.
But this is my point, is that mathematical terms contain or have associated with them very precise definitions.
I see. So you're saying infinitesimal in the realm of mathematics. Can you, for our audience, define infinitesimal in mathematics versus in English, please?
Well, if you say 1 over r is r approaches infinity, then you get a value of infinitesimal size.
Okay. You meaning an infinity that has a limit?
Well, it has a limit going in a certain direction. So you
No,
have.
not everyone is a math, physics major.
Clearly.
So I'm trying to make it clear for our audience.
Well, I'm just saying infinitesimal is not necessarily the opposite of infinite in mathematical terms. That's my only point.
Okay. So my point very simply is that whatever that form was, apparently at one point it chose without apparently having the ability to choose or the intellect to choose or the power to choose, to suddenly go from that to bustling with astronomical wonders for the last 13.8 billion years in such a particular direction that we are here having this conversation. Islam rejects this as an off chance, and it takes such a profound amount of blind faith to turn a blind eye to the possibility that there should be certainly something directing this.
But that's not my argument, though.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this came from off chance. I'm just saying I don't know where it came from.
Okay.
And religious people say that they do know where it comes from on the basis of no evidence.
Yeah. So when we say evidence, if you want evidence for something that is metaphysical, then the evidence for that should be metaphysical. A lot of atheists, not yourself perhaps, a lot of atheists, they say we want evidence for God. And what they do, which I feel is very disingenuous from a scientific perspective, not all of them, some of them, they give the impression that there should be some laboratory evidence for God. Whereas God Almighty is by definition outside of what he has created. Otherwise, him and his creation are the exact same thing. So if time and matter and everything began, Islam postulates that, look, you see the level of design in this universe which is absolutely undeniable. You see the level of genius in the way that each particle of the universe interacts in a specific particular way, and there's a harmony from the beginning of the 13.8 billion years until today. Islam says that that is God. The thing that requires far less blind faith is that there must be an intelligence behind all the intelligence that we see.
But my point is, you still haven't really made clear why that point of ignorance must be assigned to a God. You said, for instance, that there must be...
Let me clarify, because I know, but I have responded to this twice. Let me just 30 seconds. I said the reason that we say that it is a God is that everything that we see in the universe that followed the Big Bang, that is all we have to work with. By inference and deduction and rational conclusions that we draw, when we see that there is design and we see that there is intellect, we know that, for example, artificial intelligence requires dozens, if not hundreds of intellects to try to create it, to try to put it together. Likewise, we say that our observation dictates that where we see intellect, there must be some intelligence behind it. So when we are postulating an eternal factor that predates this universe and is after this universe, then that is what is God, and it does not in any way run contrary to our scientific understanding or any philosophical postulation.
But Islam is asserting that the same God, which you have described, which is the impetus for the universe, is also an omniscient, all-knowing, interactive God.
Yes.
I'm saying that whatever occurred before, if before is even an appropriate word to use, before the Big Bang, does not even, it could have been a previous universe, multiverse, you name it.
Yeah.
There is no such requisite as an interactive, intellectual God. You know what I mean?
So
It could have been anything before. We don't know.
Yeah.
We have no idea what the universe was at the Big Bang, before the Big Bang.
So what you have, for the third time, Phil, to respond to is the argument that I've put forth that we know about the inception of the universe based off of what we see here. For example, what we see of the microwave background radiation, the redshift effect of galaxies, etc., the expanding universe that we observe, we work backwards. That is the only way that cosmologists can infer the Big Bang.
That is correct.
We work backwards and we go toward the inception based off of the nature of how things behave and manifest in this universe. I'm saying that is the exact way that Islam also postulates for us to look at the intellect that is required for things to function in the way that they do. Look at the design. You said what you call design. I can quote a dozen atheists who also say that there is the appearance of design. Now, at this point,
Well,
just
I think
inserting...
by that, they would just be referring to complexity. I don't think any atheist worth his salt would actually call something design.
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
clearly a mischaracterization.
So, I have quoted them by saying that they say the appearance of design. I'm not mischaracterizing.
But that is in no way associated with them thinking that there is some actual design. By that, they just mean complexity, clearly.
That's because Islam says that there isn't just complexity. This is another point where atheists have been very dishonest. There's function. It's one thing to have a very complex random structure. and then say that just has the appearance of design. Let's say Fibonacci sequence that naturally occurs. It's another thing to have a chair in front of me because there's particular function in that chair. There's not just design. I have pored over the scores of books of many atheists, and they have deliberately left out this word, that there's particular function at every single step. Function cannot exist in our observed experience unless there is a deliberateness, a deliberate intellect behind it. So you're asking for evidence. I'm saying there's deliberate design with specific function in every particle of the universe for the last 13.8 billion years. And when we work backwards using the exact same rules and ethics of rationality and inference, and you go back and say, yes, there may be a footprint of a designer. There may be a footprint of the appearance of design. There's a footprint of language and communication. But at the end of it, there's nothing there. That is where I'm saying there's a disconnect for atheists to answer why a blind eye is turned. I agree that that's not proof. I totally agree with you. Islam says it should push us enough to sincerely investigate. Islam has offered that, look, if we have a creator, you and I ought to know. If God doesn't exist, we ought to know, because then he's what? The biggest lie of the universe. Nobody wants to live a lie.
Well, that would be contradictory and paradoxical. So.
What do you mean? If God exists, he is the greatest truth of the universe. If he does not exist, then it's the biggest lie that's ever been told.
By whom? God?
By the prophets of God, by people who claim that God exists.
Well, if God doesn't exist, then there are no prophets of God.
Well, whoever they were, I mean, that's what I mean. Whoever postulates.
Just people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, regardless, it's the biggest lie that's ever told. So,
well, I mean, sure. I think people come up with strange ideas all the time. Cultures, different civilizations.
An idea
have all their own religions.
that holds sway over billions of people, a vast majority of the human population, about the fundamental origin of the universe.
Yes, I mean, it is quite natural to be super.
Name one contrary theory that has held sway like God.
I will explain my point that it is very natural and in some ways evolutionarily beneficial to be superstitious. You know, if you hear a noise, it is to your genetic and evolutionary benefit to think that there's a bear over there rather than it's just the wind. Because those people who thought it was just the wind may have gotten eaten by a bear, and those who thought it was a bear but it was actually the wind survived to pass on their genes. So this is the reasoning why people are in general, religious or have spiritual perspectives.
I'll tell you why this is completely untrue. You said that there's evolutionary benefit in us being superstitious.
That's
while
100% true.
Islam has come and gotten rid of superstition. The prophets of God used to come to the most pagan of people. Every single prophet of God in history came to the people who had the greatest superstitions, removed those superstitions, and pointed to one cause of all causes, one God.
I think that is superstitious by definition.
But you haven't...
To assume supernatural causes for natural occurrings is superstitious.
Well, nobody has ever asked for a new supernatural cause in Islam. Islam says
isn't
that
God supernatural? You said that on your own.
When you say supernatural, it is a loaded word. Atheists often use the word supernatural because it is attached to things like unicorns and fairies.
I would argue that's on the same level as God and prophets and such.
And yet, what I have argued is that whatever happens naturally, I have demonstrated, and we all acknowledge, that there is a footprint of incontrovertible design and functionality and direction in the universe.
I did not agree with that.
Sorry?
I did not.
You believe there is not design in the universe?
By some I believe I can design a product.
Okay.
I don't believe that there is a God that designed the universe.
You're an intelligent being, right? That's why you can design a product.
Correct.
So you just demonstrated that in order to design a product, you need an intelligent being.
No. You have it backwards. I didn't say the converse is true. I say that because I'm an intelligent being, I may design a product. That doesn't require that for any given product, such as the Earth or the universe, there must have been some supernatural creator. So you have not made the argument that I'm making. I did not say the converse is true.
But
when
when
you agree with that?
Let me clarify why you are still making the point that I think you're making.
Okay.
Number one, you said as an argument that you can design something.
Yes.
You are an intelligent being.
Sure.
Right? Anything that has a specific function in our observed within whatever biological world, anything that serves a specific function and is designed has to have a designer behind it. That's what I'm saying. There is no thing in the universe greater than the universe itself that serves greater functions and a greater number of specific functions and enjoys a greater level of design. That's why I'm saying atheism requires such a blind eye to just close your eyes and your ears and say that yes, there is design there, but there is no designer.
Well, there's a difference in different interpretations of the word function. So, for example, a chair might be designed for me to sit in it or something
Okay.
like this. But there are various properties of chemicals, proteins, elements, matter that may be to our advantage because we exist, but they don't serve that function inherently. They just have certain properties.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So, for example, osmosis,
Okay.
right? So if I, if you ever been in the shower for too long or the bath too long,
Sure.
and your fingers get all kind of pruny,
Yeah.
that is due to a process known as osmosis. It operates all throughout every single one of your cells.
Okay.
It has the different chemicals and proteins and all sorts of things are transported between the membrane of your cells, and one of the fundamental principles is osmosis.
Okay.
Now you can't just go to Pluto. If there's let's just say there's an entity on Pluto that had no use for osmosis, that property would still exist, but it doesn't serve a particular function in that context. You are only perceiving it to have a certain function because it is useful to you in your evolutionary lineage. So,
It is
that there
very
is no inherent function.
It is inherent. Yes. If a chair.
So there is no inherent function.
Sorry. No. I completely disagree.
That's the argument that I made.
Yeah, so I completely disagree. Osmosis serves a function. To say that there's a chair and I put it in Antarctica and I say it serves no function, that doesn't take away from the designer that designed it for a specific function. It's a terrible argument.
But I'm not saying osmosis was designed for a specific function, though.
But it is. It serves a specific function.
You
just said-
we utilize it. Without osmosis, we would not exist.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that osmosis was invented by a sky fairy for the utilization of human beings.
But do you see what I mean? That I have said many times, anything that serves a specific design and function always has a specific designer and an intended design behind it. And you have not shown me a single particle of the universe that does not serve a particular function.
Just because it does something, has a certain property, acts in a certain way, does not mean that it was designed to be of use to human beings or something like this. Let me ask you, what is the function of a muon?
Sorry,
What's the function of a muon?
Can you help define what a muon is?
Well, it's a certain particular subatomic particle that you have absolutely no use for in your everyday life.
Okay. Did you know that for many years there are at least hundreds of aspects of the human body that scientists thought served no purpose? Just because we don't know what purpose it serves at this point of time in our knowledge does not mean that we will not see that it will serve a purpose.
Well, I think that's...
And the thing I'd like to add to this is it's funny to me that atheists bring this point up, because whenever I talk about how could this have happened in such a particular way, or this have happened in a particular way, and I give dozens of different examples everywhere from DNA to the way that fundamental particles interact, even though statistically they should not have. And we know that mathematically, excuse me one moment, let me finish. Then at that time they love to say, oh, the thing is that science has not reached there yet, and eventually we will be able to explain. I've talked to hundreds of people in the last few weeks, and consistently our atheist brothers and sisters in humankind raise this point. So we should have one standard. On one side, an atheist will say, well, science has not reached that point yet, therefore we cannot understand, we cannot insert a designer there despite the appearance of design, which I have not received any response, neither from you or from anyone else. Number two, they use the same litmus test, and then they say, oh, the thing is that we don't know yet, science will figure it out, and then they reverse it on this.
Do you think that's a weak argument?
Sorry?
Do you think that's a weak argument that we don't know yet? Therefore,
I think we should use a...
Aren't you doing the same thing in reverse? Where you're saying we haven't discovered something, or whatever these atheists
no,
think.
God has been discovered by millions of people, and that's why it holds
God has been
sway.
asserted by millions of people, let's be clear.
And experienced. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, have people experienced Helios, the sun god, before? The Greek pagan god?
The one God, if we're talking about experience, right? If we're talking about the experience of people, then the one God who created everything, the monotheistic one God, that was postulated by every single prophet of God.
This argument that you're making on the experience of God, that millions of people have experienced God,
billions,
or discovered God, billions.
Yeah.
I mean, that totally depends on the type of religion that you're talking about. You know what I mean? So, like, that's in no way evidence for God. It's just evidence for people's superstitions, as I said before.
The reason that's a socio-historical error is that every single prophet, from Buddha to Krishna, Muhammad, Abraham, they all at their origin taught one God. Thousands of years apart, with no communication with one another, they all at their origin taught one God. That's what I meant.
Those religions did. But how many thousands of other religions have taught multiple gods? Hinduism has taught multiple gods?
Hinduism, I have scriptures and I have spoken to Hindu pundits. is a monotheistic religion,
Okay, are there polytheistic religions?
not at their origin. That's what I
There
mean.
are no polytheistic religions?
Not a single religion at its origin is not monotheistic. The ambassadors of religion were the prophets of God.
Okay.
What people changed afterward, that was paganism. That's what I'm trying to say. Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, Abraham, Noah, every single prophet of God in every place of the world, all incidentally taught of one God. People afterward interpolated. They are not representatives of the faith. The prophets of God are.
But
Do you see why there needs to be context to answer your yes or no question?
No.
Do you understand?
No, I don't accept your argument. There were
Okay.
religions before the prophets you just named, right?
Yes.
Were there polytheistic religions?
This is what I'm trying to say.
So no.
When Moses came and taught one God, he came and taught one God. People interpolated that and they started going toward polytheism. That's not what Moses taught.
Okay.
Jesus came and called people back to one God again.
Okay.
After that, people started saying that there are more gods than one in various societies.
Okay.
I'm saying the prophets of God are the litmus test. The prophets of God who claim to be the ambassadors of God, they're the litmus test, and they have always said that there's one God.
Okay.
Anyone else who postulates that there is more than one God, they're running contrary to the original teachings of
There
religion.
are people who believe that, though, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there are people who have polytheistic beliefs.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that was my question the entire time that you avoided.
I-
And what about before Moses? Who's the earliest prophet you can think of?
Well, prophets have been coming for, according to Islam, hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay. Well, who's the earliest one you can name?
The first prophet that Islam talks about by name is Adam, peace
Okay.
be upon him.
But so there are people before Adam.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Were there polytheistic beliefs before Adam?
Yes, but that always followed monotheistic belief.
There are plenty of polytheistic religious texts. I mean, Hinduism itself, as for some reason you've refused to acknowledge, is polytheistic. Even at its core.
Hinduism, at its origin, by the person who brought Hinduism, Krishna, taught one God. After that, there were interpolations. That's what I'm saying. That we cannot,
Well, Shiva, Krishna, those are just two from the original Hindu religion. That's polytheistic.
It is polytheistic. I totally agree with you, my friend.
Even from the founding of the religion, your argument seems to be
No, it's not from the founding. That's what I'm saying. The original scriptures of every religion the original founders of that religion have always pointed to one God. What people come and do falsely afterward does not represent that prophet and that origin.
how can you possibly say that all of them were monotheistic? That's just your own assertion from your religious text.
So let me respond to that. We have to work off of whatever historical data that we have, as far back as it goes.
Okay.
Very simply, we can say, as far back as our information, our understanding goes, all the founders of religion have always taught one God. That much is an established fact.
That's patently false. That's not even true.
I'm sorry. How are you saying this? I can demonstrate to you from all of the scriptures of the greatest religions in the world that all of the prophets of God taught one God.
I don't care what the scriptures are saying. I care about the actual evidence that we have.
But you just quoted the Hindu scripture
No,
to try
no.
to demonstrate. Hold on. You just quoted the Hindu scripture to try to demonstrate polytheism. I'm quoting the scriptures of various faiths to quote monotheism, and you're saying that's not evidence.
You are basing your arguments of reality based on the actual content of what the Bible says, what the Quran says. When it comes to that, I'm concerned about the actual evidence that we have for cultures that predated history, for which we have none. Therefore, you can make no argument as to their polytheism. And with that, I am unfortunately out of time.
I appreciate it. Thank you, man.
Ali?
What was your name again?
Yusuf. Nice to meet you.
man.
What is
I
your
really
YouTube channel?
appreciate it. I hope you know that this is just a loving
Of course. Here,
conversation
come here.
I never want to leave anyone like
Of course.
negative.
And what's your YouTube channel?
Review of religions.
Review of Religions. Okay, thank you.
Check us out. Thank you, man.
Have a great day.
May I have your name, please?
No.
Sure. What we're doing, the point is to...
Cool, but like that's not how rationality works. Prove that he exists. Because I say there's a unicorn that rules the universe. Okay? Prove me wrong.